The human medical ships arrived 6 hours after the battle ended. They were smaller than the warships, but no less impressive. Each one carried technology designed to treat injuries that would kill most beings, technology born from Earth's harsh environment, where even a simple wound could mean death. Marine medic Sol stepped off the transport shuttle onto Haven 7 station. The Velnari Medical Center was overwhelmed with casualties from the battle. Injured crew members filled every bed, every corridor. The Velnari doctors were doing their best, but they had never dealt with trauma on this scale. Sol had. She had trained for mass casualty events. On Earth, you trained for the worst because the worst always happened eventually. She found the chief medical officer, a Velnari doctor named Resh, trying to coordinate triage. He looked exhausted, his scales dull with stress. "I'm here to help," Sul said through her translator. "Where do you need me?" Resh looked at her with all 4 eyes. "Can you handle traumatic injuries? Severed limbs, internal damage, radiation exposure?" Sol nodded. "That's what I do." She worked for 18 hours straight. The human medical technology was far beyond what the Velnari had. Nanobots that could repair tissue at the cellular level, synthetic blood that worked with most carbon-based life forms, scanners that could detect internal injuries invisible to normal methods. By the time Sol took a break, she had saved 43 lives. Lives that would have been lost with Velnari medicine alone. She sat in the station's observation lounge, drinking recycled water and watching human ships move through the debris field. They were searching for survivors, collecting bodies, beginning the cleanup that would take months. On the planet's surface, Ambassador Tae-Wan met with Admiral Haijin for the first time in 5 years. They embraced like the family they were, cousin to cousin, 2 humans far from home. "You came," Tae-Wan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Of course we came," Haijin replied. "Did you think we'd abandon you?" "I hoped, but I wasn't sure. Earth has been quiet for so long." Haijin looked up at the sky where human ships orbited. "We were never gone. We were just waiting, preparing, making sure that if we ever came back to the galaxy, we'd be ready for anything." They walked through the streets of the Velnari capital. The city was beautiful, full of art and architecture that spoke of a peaceful culture. But it was also scarred now. Buildings damaged by falling debris from the battle. Streets empty as people huddled in their homes, still afraid. "They're terrified of us," Tae-Wan observed. "I know. They saw what we can do. They'll need time to understand we're not a threat to them." General Yun arrived from Mars 3 days later. He came with supply ships and engineers ready to help rebuild the Velnari defensive systems. He met with Commander Orleth in her command center, which was still being repaired from battle damage. Orleth studied the old human general carefully. He moved slowly with the stiffness of natural aging. Most species in the galaxy used life extension technology. Humans apparently did not. "Your fleet saved my people," Orleth said. "We owe you a debt we can never repay." Yun shook his head. "You owe us nothing. You asked for help, we gave it. That's what civilized beings do." "But your weapons," Orleth continued. "Your ships, your tactics, they're beyond anything we've seen. The Galactic Confederation has strict rules about military technology, treaties that limit weapon development. How did you build such things?" "We didn't sign your treaties," Yun replied. "Earth was isolated before those treaties existed. We built our defenses based on what we thought we'd need to survive. Turns out we were right." Over the following weeks, more truth came out. The human fleet was just a fraction of Earth's military power. Most of it remained in the Sol system, guarding humanity's home. The ships that came to help the Velnari were considered a light response force. The galaxy struggled to understand what that meant. A light response force had destroyed the Kresh swarm in 4 hours. What could the full force do? President Bitna addressed the Velnari Council in person, traveling from Earth in a diplomatic ship. She was careful with her words, knowing that everything she said would be analyzed by every species in the galaxy. "Earth chose isolation because we recognized we were different," she explained. "We're from a harsh world. We evolved as persistence hunters, as tool users, as problem solvers who faced extinction every few thousand years and survived anyway. That made us dangerous in ways most species aren't." "But you saved us," Council Leader Vren said. "You could have ignored our call." "You chose to help," Bitna nodded. "Being dangerous doesn't mean being cruel. It means having the power to cause harm and choosing not to. Earth wants to protect, not conquer. We want to help, not rule." If the galaxy can accept that, we'd like to end our isolation. The political discussions took weeks. Representatives from other species arrived to see the human fleet for themselves. Some were grateful. Others were afraid. All of them had opinions. Captain Deho found himself giving tours of the Monsoon to alien dignitaries. He showed them the weapon systems, the living quarters, the training facilities. He answered their questions honestly, even when the answers made them uncomfortable. "Why do you practice combat every day?" a Rigelian ambassador asked. "Because peace is maintained through strength," Deho replied. "We train so we're ready when we're needed. We hope we're never needed, but we prepare anyway." Engineer June helped Velnari technicians upgrade their ship designs. He was careful about what he shared. Some human technology was too dangerous to spread. Fusion reactors were fine. Railguns were acceptable. Singularity missiles were absolutely not. "Your ships are built for exploration," June explained to a group of Velnari engineers. "That's good. That's what the galaxy needs. But you also need to be able to defend yourselves. Let us help you with that." The work was slow but steady. The Velnari were quick learners, eager to understand how to protect their worlds. They would never be warriors like humans, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to be strong enough to discourage attackers. 3 months after the battle, Commander Orlith approached Admiral Hyajin with a proposal. The Galactic Confederation wants to meet with Earth's leaders. They want to discuss humanity's role in galactic affairs. Hyajin smiled. "They want to control us, you mean? They're afraid of you. You have to understand. Most species have never seen military power like yours. They don't know how to process it. I understand fear. Earth was born from fear. Every predator we faced, every natural disaster we survived taught us to be afraid. But fear is just information. It tells you what's dangerous. What you do with that information is what matters." The Galactic Confederation convened on a neutral station. 200 species sent representatives. Earth sent a delegation led by President Bitna, with Admiral Hyajin and General Yun as advisors. The meeting started with accusations. Human weapons violated 17 treaties. Human ships were capable of planetary destruction. Human military doctrine was too aggressive for civilized space. President Bitna listened patiently, then responded with words she had prepared carefully. "You're right. We're dangerous. We're from a death world, and it made us into something most of you can't understand. But that danger saved the Velnari. That danger stopped the Kresh, and that danger is now offering to protect this galaxy from threats you can't handle alone." "At what cost?" demanded the Rigelian representative. "You could destroy any of our worlds if you wanted. Why should we trust you?" "Because we're already here," Bitna replied calmly. "We've had the power to conquer for 200 years. We chose isolation instead. Now we're choosing cooperation. The question isn't whether you can trust us. The question is whether you can afford not to." The debate continued for days. Eventually, a compromise emerged. Earth would establish a defense initiative. Human ships would respond to existential threats anywhere in the galaxy. But they would not interfere in local conflicts or politics. They would be protectors, not rulers. The agreement was signed by all parties. Earth was officially part of the galactic community again, with conditions, with boundaries, with fear on all sides, but also with hope. Ambassador Taiwan stood on the observation deck of Haven 7, watching human and Velnari ships patrol together. It was a strange sight, the brutal human warships moving in formation with the elegant Velnari explorers, but it worked. Hay joined him carrying 2 cups of Velnari tea. "Do you think this will last?" she asked. "This alliance?" Taiwan accepted the tea and took a sip. It was sweet, nothing like Earth's bitter coffee. "I think it has to," he said. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. The Kresh were just one threat. There will be others. We need each other, even if we're afraid of each other, especially then. Fear means you're being honest about the risks. Trust is built through actions, not words. Earth will prove itself through what it does, not what it says." In the months that followed, human ships began appearing across the galaxy, not invading, not conquering, just present. A quiet promise that if someone called for help, humanity would answer. The age of isolation was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, other threats watched and learned. They learned that the galaxy had protectors now, protectors from a death world called Earth, protectors who fought with the fury of survival and the discipline of 200 years of preparation. The Kresh swarm tried to adapt. The hive mind processed what it had seen and began calculating new strategies. These human ships were dangerous, yes, but they were still just ships. Ships could be overwhelmed. Ships could be consumed. The swarm had consumed entire civilizations. This would be no different. The hive mind was wrong. Admiral Hyojin watched her tactical display as the Kresh tried to flank her formation. They were predictable. Every hive mind was. They thought as one, which meant they thought in patterns, and patterns could be predicted. Commander Na, deploy countermeasures. Pattern Delta 7. Yes, Admiral. The human fleet split into 3 groups with perfect precision. No radio chatter. No confusion. Every captain knew their role. They had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times in simulation. Now it was real. The Kresh sent 5,000 drones to swarm the left flank. Captain Daeho's destroyer group was waiting. The Monsoon and her sister ships didn't engage in dogfighting. They didn't need to. Each destroyer released clouds of smart mines, small explosives with their own sensors and maneuvering thrusters. The mines spread out across space, creating a web of death. When the Kresh drones entered the field, the mines activated. They didn't just explode randomly. They calculated optimal detonation points, synchronized their timing, created cascading shockwaves that turned one explosion into 100. 3,000 Kresh drones disappeared in the first wave. The remaining 2,000 tried to evade, but the mines hunted them. Each mine that missed its first target corrected course and tried again. Within 2 minutes, the entire Kresh formation was gone. Minimal ammunition expenditure, Daeho reported to the Admiral, reloading for next wave. The Kresh tried a different approach. They sent their bioships directly at the human dreadnoughts, hoping their mass and armor would overwhelm the human vessels. It was a tactic that had worked against every other species. Momentum and size eventually won battles. The humans didn't play by those rules. Commander Na, serving as weapons coordinator aboard the Indomitable, activated the ship's most controversial weapon system, the Singularity missiles. Each one contained a miniature black hole, held in stasis by magnetic fields until impact. Firing solution locked, she reported. 3 targets identified. Distance optimal. Fire, Hyojin ordered. 3 missiles launched from the Indomitable's ventral tubes. They moved fast, accelerating at rates that would crush any living pilot. But these missiles had no pilots, just computers and a mathematical certainty of destruction. The missiles hit 3 Kresh bioships and detonated. The black holes, no larger than a marble, expanded instantly. The bioships didn't explode. They just fell inward, crushed by gravity into a point smaller than an atom. The black holes existed for exactly 3 seconds before collapsing. Their mass insufficient to sustain themselves. But 3 seconds was enough. 3 capital ships simply ceased to exist. No debris, no survivors. Just empty space where they had been. The Kresh hive mind recalculated again. These weapons were unknown. These tactics were foreign. The humans fought without hesitation, without fear, without mercy. They fought like something the swarm had never encountered before. They fought like predators. Engineer June watched the battle from his station aboard the cruiser Monsoon Rain. He was not a combat officer, but he had trained on every system the ship carried. Now he watched as those systems performed exactly as designed. The human ships moved through the battlefield like dancers, each one knowing where the others would be. They created overlapping fields of fire, supported each other's positions, covered each other's weaknesses. It was beautiful in a terrible way. The Kresh tried to adapt their formation. They pulled their ships back, trying to use their numbers to surround the human fleet. The hive mind had learned that direct assault didn't work, so it would try encirclement. Admiral Hyojin saw the maneuver developing. She had seen it in the simulations. The Kresh were predictable. All ships, offensive pattern Omega, let them think they're surrounding us. The human fleet contracted, pulling into a tighter formation. To the Kresh, it looked like they were winning. The humans were trapped, surrounded by 10 times their numbers. The swarm began closing in, confident in its victory. Then the human ships activated their secondary weapons. Point defense guns that had been silent until now suddenly came to life. But these weren't designed for defense. They were designed for area denial. Thousands of rapid-fire guns opened up simultaneously, creating walls of metal that no ship could pass through. The Kresh ships that had been closing in ran into those walls and disintegrated. It was like trying to fly through a solid barrier. Nothing survived. The human fleet had turned itself into a metal storm, and the Kresh were flying directly into it. In 40 minutes, the humans had destroyed half the swarm's forces. The Kresh hive mind, for the first time in its 1,000-year history, made a decision it had never made before. It ordered a retreat. The bioships turned away from the battle, trying to accelerate to FTL speeds. They would leave this system, regroup, return with more forces. The swarm always returned. It always consumed. This was just a temporary setback. Admiral Hyojin watched the Kresh begin their retreat and smiled. It was not a kind smile. All ships, pursuit pattern, target their drives first. I want them crippled before they can jump. Admiral, Commander Na said carefully, the Velnari defensive protocols say we should let enemy forces retreat if they disengage. We're not following Velnari protocols, Ye-Jin replied. We're following human doctrine. And human doctrine is clear. When you fight a threat to innocent lives, you eliminate that threat completely. No survivors, no retreats, no second chances. The human fleet surged forward. They were faster than the Kresh ships. They had better engines, better navigation, better everything. The swarm's bioships were powerful, but they were organic. They had limits. Human ships had no such limits. The destroyers caught up to the retreating Kresh first. They targeted drive systems with surgical precision, crippling ship after ship. The bioships tumbled through space, unable to maneuver, unable to escape. The cruisers came next, firing on the disabled ships. They used conventional weapons now, missiles and railguns. The black hole weapons were expensive and reserved for capital ships. These Kresh vessels didn't deserve such quick deaths. Finally, the dreadnoughts arrived. They formed a firing line, a wall of human military might. Every gun trained on a single target. The Kresh Hive Node ship, the massive biological construct that housed the central consciousness of this swarm branch. It was the size of a small moon, grown over centuries, containing the memories of 1,000 consumed worlds. All dreadnoughts target the Hive Node. Hyojin transmitted. Synchronized fire. On my mark, 50 dreadnoughts aligned their main guns. 50 ships powered up their reactors to maximum output. The energy signatures were so massive that they created visible distortions in space. Fire. 50 railguns fired simultaneously. 1,500 tons of metal accelerated to relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy was equal to multiple nuclear weapons, all of it focused on a single target. The Hive Node ship tried to deploy defensive measures, but it was too slow. The salvo hit. The ship didn't explode. It shattered. Pieces of it flew apart, breaking into smaller and smaller fragments until there was nothing left but dust. With the Hive Node destroyed, the remaining Kresh ships went dark. The hive mind connection was severed. The individual ships were just organic constructs with no intelligence to guide them. They drifted in space, inert and harmless. The battle was over. On the surface of the Velnari homeworld, Taiwan watched the last light fade from the sky as the Kresh threat ended. 4 hours. The battle had lasted 4 hours. The Velnari had fought for weeks and accomplished nothing. Humanity had arrived and ended it in less than a day. Hay stood beside him, trembling. "What are your people?" she whispered. Taiwan thought about his answer. "We're from a world that tried very hard to kill us," he said finally. "We're the ones who survived." In orbit, Admiral Hyojin looked at the debris field that had once been the Kresh swarm. 10,000 ships reduced to wreckage. Not a single human vessel lost. Not a single human casualty. It was the most one-sided battle in galactic history. "All ships begin search and rescue operations," she ordered. "Find any surviving Velnari crews. And someone get me a communication line to the surface. I need to speak with my cousin." The Kresh ships did not look like ships. They looked like living things because they were. Massive organic structures grown from stolen genetic material, powered by biological fusion cores that pulsed like diseased hearts. They moved through space in perfect coordination, thousands of ships acting as one mind. Commander Orlith watched them approach on her tactical display. Her fleet, what remained of it, formed a defensive sphere around the Velnari homeworld, 300 ships against 10,000. The mathematics were simple and brutal. "All ships hold formation," she transmitted. Her voice was steady, even though every instinct told her to run. The Velnari had evolved on peaceful worlds. Running from danger was normal. But she was a military officer. She had trained for this, even if the training had never imagined something this terrible. The first wave of Kresh fighters launched. They were small, about the size of a personal shuttle, but there were thousands of them. Drone units controlled by the hive mind, each one expendable. The Velnari point defense systems opened fire, creating a web of energy beams across space. They destroyed hundreds of drones, but thousands more kept coming. On the surface, Ambassador Taewon stood in the Planetary Defense Command Center, watching the battle through the observation windows. The sky was full of light as ships fought and died in orbit. Each flash was a life or many lives ending in an instant. Hay stood beside him, her scales pale with fear. "We should go to the bunkers," she said quietly. The council ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate. "I'm not non-essential," Taewon replied. His hand touched the human beacon hidden in his jacket pocket. It was still pulsing, still sending its signal. Someone was looking for it. He had to believe that. "And I won't hide while your people fight." In orbit, the battle grew worse. The Kresh didn't just attack ships. They released boarding pods that latched onto Velnari vessels and began pumping in biological agents. Crews died screaming as their ships were consumed from the inside, turned into raw material for the swarm. Orlith lost 3 capital ships in the first hour, then 5 more. Her tactical officers shouted updates, their voices rising with panic. She kept her own voice calm, kept issuing orders even as she watched her fleet die around her. "Focus fire on the bioships," she commanded. "Ignore the drones. If we can destroy their capital ships, the drones will become uncoordinated." It was good strategy. It didn't work. The Kresh bioships had armor grown from crystallized calcium structures, harder than most metals. Velnari weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat between civilized species barely scratched them. The swarm sent a transmission. It was the only thing they ever said, the same message they had sent to 1,000 species before. Submit to consumption or be consumed by force. Orlith responded with weapons fire. It was a futile gesture, but it was her gesture. The Velnari would die fighting, not begging. On the planet's surface, billions of people huddled in their homes watching the sky. They were artists, scientists, teachers, parents. They had built a beautiful civilization over thousands of years. And now it was ending because something hungry had found them. Taewon felt helpless. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. His weapon was words, not guns. But words meant nothing to the Kresh. They didn't negotiate. They didn't listen. They just consumed. His beacon pulsed again in his pocket. Stronger this time. Closer. In orbit, Orlith made her final stand at Haven 7, the largest orbital platform. She gathered every remaining ship around it, creating one last defensive position. 93 ships. That was all that remained of the Velnari fleet. The Kresh gathered their forces for a final assault. 10,000 ships moved into attack formation, blotting out the stars. The hive mind was patient. It could wait. It had waited for thousands of years. What was a few more hours to watch its prey squirm? Then the sensors went insane. Every display in the command center lit up with warnings, massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the system, not the gentle ripples of normal FTL travel. Something else. Something violent. Orlith stared at the readings, trying to understand. "What is that?" Her sensor officer's voice shook. "I don't know. The computer says it's impossible. Space doesn't tear like that. It can't, but it was. Reality itself was being ripped open in dozens of places. Massive wounds in space that glowed with light that should not exist. And from those wounds, something was emerging. Ships. But not like any ships the Velnari had ever seen. They were made of metal, angular and brutal, covered in armor that looked designed to take damage. They were huge. The smallest was larger than a Velnari cruiser. The largest was over 3 kilometers long, a floating fortress that made even the Kresh bioships look small. Taewon felt his heart stop when he saw them on the command center displays. He knew those shapes. He had seen pictures in his grandmother's albums. Ships from Earth, ships from home. "They came," he whispered. "They actually came." Hay grabbed his arm. "What are those? Do you know them?" "Those are human warships," Taewon said, and he was surprised to find tears on his face. "Those are humanity's fleet. There were hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. They kept emerging from the tiers in space, filling the system with their presence. They moved with precision, forming attack formations that spoke of endless practice and perfect coordination." The Kresh hive mind paused. This was new. This was unexpected. The calculations changed. The threat assessment updated. These ships radiated energy signatures that did not match galactic norms. Their weapons were unknown. Their capabilities were uncertain. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Kresh swarm felt something like caution. In orbit, Commander Orleth watched the human fleet position itself between her ships and the swarm. She tried to count them but gave up. Too many, far too many. Where had they come from? How had they arrived so fast? Are they here to help us? Her tactical officer asked. Before Orleth could answer, the human ships opened fire. The galaxy had forgotten what human weapons looked like. Most species used energy beams or plasma torpedoes, weapons that were clean and somewhat predictable, weapons that followed the treaties and conventions of civilized warfare. Humans used none of those things. The lead human ship, the massive dreadnought at the center of the formation, fired its main guns. They were not energy weapons. They were railguns, magnetic accelerators that launched solid metal rods at speeds close to the speed of light. The first salvo hit 3 Kresh bioships. They didn't explode. They simply ceased to exist. The kinetic energy was so massive that the ships vaporized instantly, turned into expanding clouds of superheated gas. The human fleet fired again. And again. And again. 12 shots per second from each gun. The lead ship had 30 guns. The math was simple and terrifying. In less than 30 seconds, the humans had destroyed more Kresh ships than the Velnari had managed in 3 hours of fighting. Taiwan watched from the surface, watched the sky fill with light as the human fleet demonstrated what 200 years of isolation and preparation had created. They had not been sleeping. They had been building. They had been training. They had been getting ready for the galaxy's worst nightmare, and now that nightmare was learning what happened when it met Earth's children. This is Admiral He Jin of the Human Star Federation ship. Indomitable, a transmission came through on all frequencies. To all Velnari forces, stand down and let us work. To the Kresh swarm, your consumption ends here. The Admiral's voice was calm, professional, and absolutely certain. The battle for the Velnari homeworld had just begun. But for the first time in weeks, Orleth allowed herself to hope. The cold hit Hyejin like a physical blow. Her eyes snapped open inside the cryopod, muscles screaming as they remembered how to move. Red emergency lights flashed across her vision. Something had triggered the automatic wake sequence, something the defense systems considered a threat-level event. She forced her hand to move, pressing the release button. The pod hissed open and warm air rushed in. Hyejin rolled out onto the deck of the command ship, her body moving on trained instinct even though her mind was still foggy. How long had she been asleep? Months? Years? Admiral on deck, a synthetic voice announced. The ship's basic computer was awake, which meant the crisis was real. Hyejin pulled herself to her feet and stumbled to the wall panel. She pressed her palm against it and the lights came up slowly. The bridge of the HSFS Indomitable looked exactly as she remembered. Banks of control stations, the massive view screen, the captain's chair she had last sat in 70 years ago. 70 years. The number appeared on her personal display when she checked. 70 years since the last drill. 70 years since anyone had needed Earth's protection. The main screen activated automatically, showing her the reason for the wake-up. A distress signal. Galactic standard frequencies. Velnari Confederation codes. And underneath it, buried in the data, a personal beacon from Taiwan. Hyejin felt ice run through her veins. Taiwan was her cousin, her childhood friend, the boy who used to sneak into military training sessions just to watch. He had chosen diplomacy instead of the military, had volunteered to serve as an observer with the Velnari, and now he was calling for help. Computer begin full wake sequence. All ships, all personnel. Authorization Hyejin 77 Delta. Acknowledged. Initiating fleet-wide revival. Across the solar system, sirens began to wail. Captain Daeho woke to the sound of his ship's alarm. The destroyer Monsoon had been his home for 30 years before the long sleep. He knew every panel, every corridor, every crew member. His hands moved automatically, releasing himself from cryo-sleep and reaching for his uniform. In the crew quarters, 300 people were waking up. Some confused, some scared, all of them trained for this exact moment. The drills had prepared them. Wake up, get to stations. Ask questions later. Deho reached the bridge in 4 minutes. His navigation officer was already there, a young woman named Sol who had joined the fleet just before the isolation. She looked exactly the same as the day they went to sleep. Cryostasis did that? Froze you in time. Status, Deho ordered, his voice rough from decades of sleep. Distress signal from Velnari space. Automatic protocols triggered. The Admiral is awake. Orders are coming through now. On Mars, General Yun stood in strategic command watching displays come to life. He had chosen not to sleep in cryo. Someone had to stay awake to maintain the fleet, even if it meant aging naturally while everyone else stayed frozen. He was an old man now, but his mind was sharp. The distress signal scrolled across his screens. He read it 3 times, analyzing every word. The Kresh swarm, that was bad. The Velnari were peaceful people, completely unprepared for something like this. And Taiwan was there. Yun opened the communication channel to Earth's government. President Bitna answered immediately. She had been in cryo as well, waking only when major decisions needed to be made. She looked tired but focused. How bad is it? She asked. Bad. The Velnari have maybe weeks left. The Kresh are the real deal. If we don't respond, an entire species dies. Bitna was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, Earth turned slowly, blue and green and peaceful. 200 years ago, Earth's leaders had made a choice. Stay isolated, stay safe. Don't risk humanity's survival by getting involved in galactic conflicts. But that was before someone asked for help. Wake the fleet, Bitna said. All of it. We're going. On Luna, Engineer June had been awake for 5 years, part of the maintenance rotation that kept the ships functional during the long sleep. He had never expected to see them actually fly. But now he watched in awe as the massive fusion reactors of the Indomitable began their startup sequence. The shipyards of Luna lit up like a small sun as 70-year-old engines ignited. For the first time since the isolation, June monitored every reading, every power spike, every thermal signature. The ships had been maintained perfectly, but theory and practice were different things. The reactor reached full power without a single error. June allowed himself a small smile. Earth's engineering was still the best in the galaxy. The fleet gathered near Neptune, far from Earth, in case something went wrong. 50 dreadnoughts appeared first. Massive ships 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that most species considered myths. Then came the cruisers, 200 of them, each one capable of destroying a small fleet. Finally, the destroyers, 500 fast attack ships that could dance through enemy formations like deadly shadows. Admiral He Jin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the fleet assemble on her screens. Every ship reported ready. Every crew at their stations. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. For 200 years, humanity had slept, waiting for the galaxy to need them again. All ships report ready, Admiral, Commander Na said from her station. She was young, had been in cryo since she was 25, and now was still 25 while decades had passed outside. Open fleet-wide channel, He Jin ordered. Every ship in the fleet received her transmission. Every crew member heard her voice. This is Admiral He Jin. The galaxy asked us to stay away. They feared what we are. They feared what we can do. We accepted that fear because we understood it. Earth is a hard world. It made us into something most species can't understand. But today someone called for help. Not just anyone. Our people. Ambassador Taiwan is with the Velnari and they're facing extinction. She paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. The galaxy is about to remember why they feared Deathworlders, not because we're cruel, not because we want war, but because when we fight to win. Completely, totally, without mercy for those who would harm innocents. The Kresh think they're the galaxy's apex predators. They're about to learn they're wrong. He Jin nodded to her navigation officer. Set course for Velnari space. Maximum FTL speed. We arrive in 72 hours. The fleet engaged their drives simultaneously. Space didn't just ripple, it tore. Massive holes opened in reality as the human ships forced their way into faster-than-light travel using raw power instead of the gentle transition most species used. From Earth, the tears in space were visible even through the atmosphere, streaks of light that burned across the sky as humanity's fleet departed for war. Children pointed at them. Parents remembered the old stories. The world held its breath. The fleet was awake. The fleet was moving. And somewhere 47 light-years away, Someone was about to discover what happened when you threatened humanity's friends. In the command center, General Yun watched the fleet disappear from sensors. He opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for 70 years and poured himself a single glass. "Give them hell, He-Jin," he whispered to the empty room. The conference room was quiet except for the soft humming of translation devices. Ambassador Taewon sat at the far end of the curved table, watching 12 different species debate their survival. He was the only human present, the only one from Earth in this entire sector of space. His dark eyes moved from speaker to speaker, taking in their fear. The Velnari were a peaceful people. Their civilization had never known real war. They built beautiful cities, created art, explored the stars with gentle curiosity, but now their worlds were dying and they did not know how to stop it. Orleth, the military advisor, stood before the holographic display. Her crystalline body reflected the red warning lights that filled the room. 3 colony worlds had gone dark in the past 2 weeks. No signals, no survivors, just silence where millions had once lived. "The Kresh swarm has entered our space," Orleth said, her translated voice steady, despite the fear Taewon could see in her crystalline form. "They do not negotiate. They do not stop. They consume everything in their path." Taewon had read about the Kresh, the galaxy's oldest nightmare, a hive mind that turned entire star systems into biological matter, feeding an endless hunger that had existed for thousands of years. They were why most species stayed close to their homeworlds. They were why the Galactic Confederation existed in the first place. "Our defensive fleet engaged them at the Outer Reach Station," Orleth continued. "We lost 17 ships in the first hour. The Kresh have thousands more coming. We estimate 3 months before they reach our homeworld." The council chamber filled with nervous sounds. Clicking, humming, the rustle of different body types shifting in their seats. Taewon remained still. He had learned long ago that humans moved differently than most species. Too quickly, too aggressively. He had trained himself to be calm around others. "We must ask for help," said Council Leader Vren, her 4 eyes closing slowly. "The Confederation has protocols for this." "The emergency signal." "The signal has never worked," another council member argued. "No one answers distress calls anymore. Not with the Kresh species hide. They protect themselves." Taewon leaned forward slightly. "Send it anyway," he said quietly. His translator changed his words into something the Velnari could understand. "Someone might hear. Someone might care." Orleth looked at him with something like hope. "Your people, Ambassador, Earth, could they help?" Taewon felt his chest tighten. Earth. Home. He had not seen it in 5 years, not since he took this diplomatic post, one of only 20 humans serving outside the Sol system. Earth had isolated itself 200 years ago after the first contact incident. The galaxy had seen human weapons, human soldiers, human warships, and decided humanity was too dangerous to include in galactic society. "I don't know," Taewon admitted. "Earth went quiet a long time ago. We chose isolation. The galaxy wanted us contained, and we agreed. But you're here," Vren said softly. "That means Earth still cares about the galaxy. I'm here as an observer only. I have no authority to speak for Earth's government. I can send a message, but I cannot promise an answer." The council voted quickly. They would send the emergency signal on all frequencies, reaching out to every corner of the galaxy. It was a desperate move, but they had no other choice. Within minutes, the signal went out. A simple message in Galactic Standard. "The Velnari Confederation faces extinction. We ask for help. Please, anyone." Taewon returned to his small quarters and activated his personal communicator. It was old technology by galactic standards, but it used human encryption. He recorded a message to Earth's diplomatic corps explaining the situation. Then he added a personal note to his cousin, who served in the military on Mars. "Yijin, if anyone there still remembers me, tell them the Velnari are good people. They don't deserve this. If Earth has any mercy left, now would be the time to show it." He sent the message and sat in the darkness of his room, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth orbited its yellow sun, protected by who knew what kind of defenses. The galaxy thought humanity had destroyed itself during isolation. Too violent, too aggressive, unable to exist without conflict, Taewon knew better. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandmother. Stories about the great ships that guarded Earth. Stories about weapons that could crack planets. Stories about soldiers who trained their entire lives for wars that never came. Before the isolation, humanity had prepared for the worst threats the galaxy could offer. But 200 years was a long time. Maybe those ships were gone now. Maybe those weapons had been dismantled. Maybe humanity had finally learned to be peaceful. 3 days passed. The creche moved closer. 2 more colonies went silent. The Velnari fleet positioned itself for a final defense of the homeworld, but everyone knew it would not be enough. Taiwan helped coordinate civilian evacuations, though there was nowhere safe to evacuate to. On the 4th day, Hai found him in the Defense Command Center. She was his assistant, a young Velnari who had studied human culture and language. Her scales were pale with stress. "Ambassador, the sensors have detected something strange at the edge of the system." Taiwan looked up at the displays. Deep space sensors showed nothing but background radiation and distant stars. "What kind of strange?" "I don't know. The computers say there's nothing there, but the gravitational readings are wrong. Like something heavy is approaching, but we can't see it." Orlith joined them, her crystalline form dim with exhaustion. "It's probably more creche. They sometimes approach in stealth mode before attacking." But Taiwan felt something different. A tingling at the back of his neck. An instinct that had kept humanity alive on Earth for millions of years. He pulled up his personal communicator and checked for messages. Nothing from Earth, nothing from Mars, just his own messages, unanswered. Then his communicator vibrated once. A single pulse. Not a message. A beacon acknowledgement. Something was looking for his specific signal. Something was triangulating his position. "When do the gravitational readings say this unknown contact will arrive?" Taiwan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Hay checked her display. 2 hours. Maybe less. Taiwan stood and walked to the observation window. He looked up at the stars, at the black space between them. Somewhere out there, maybe, possibly something was coming. He did not let himself hope too much. Hope was dangerous, but he allowed himself to remember his grandmother's stories. The stories about humanity's fleet. The stories about what Deathworlders could do when someone asked for help. The stories about ships that tore holes in space itself to cross the galaxy in days instead of years. "Keep monitoring those readings," Taiwan said quietly, "and be ready for anything."